my people, and if you're watching this interview or listening to this podcast, you're most definitely my people. Welcome to another episode of Botched, Bots, and Chair Shots. Tonight we have a special guest hailing from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, the home place of my alma mater. He is one of the superstars we see regularly at Tennessee All-Pro Wrestling. He is Jeremiah Plunkett. Jeremiah, thanks for coming on and chatting about some wrestling. How are you?
Oh man, thanks for having me. And there's one thing I like to talk about is wrestling. So
It's a big thing around here, just to say the least.
a little bit, yeah.
Let's go ahead and jump right at the top of it and start. When did wrestling become more than just a hobby for you, and when did it become kind of your passion?
So I was always a wrestling fan, like my entire life. I remember watching wrestling as young as like 5 years old. But when it really became more of a passion and something that I wanted to even think about pursuing, I think it was around 96. I may have my years wrong, but I was around 10 years old. And that's when I discovered Memphis Wrestling on, I believe it was on the CW at that time. But it came on after cartoons. And I was flipping and I just saw this crazy like studio wrestling. You know what I mean? Not big WWF or at the time or WCW, studio wrestling. And I got really enamored by how kind of gritty it was. And then the point when I went, yeah, I need to learn how to do this is watching an episode in which Jerry the King Lawler is coming back. He was doing commentary for the WWF at the time, so he'd only come back periodically. And they recycled, I later found out, one of the old promo videos for Lawler. And I believe it's the King of the Mountain video. And he's throwing fireballs all throughout the video. And that was mind blowing to a young, around 10-year-old me. So I wanted to become a professional wrestler because I wanted to learn how to throw fire. Because in my mind, that's what they teach you in wrestling school.
I remember some of my earliest memories as well, early to mid-90s, was waking up and watching wrestling on Saturday mornings and Saturday nights. So before we got on air, you and I kind of talked about some of the NWAs and some of that in the territories and stuff like that. Independent wrestling as a whole looks very different than it did in 2005 when you started here in 2022. What are some of the biggest things you see that are different in the business from when you debuted to where you're at now?
So I feel like I'm kind of on that crux when I came in between the last of the old school guys, like filtering out, and the beginning of the newer school guys coming in. You had Ring of Honor that was just starting. So that was the first ever, I guess, super indie that at least I was aware of. We were just 3 or 4 years from USWA folding. So the last official territory is dead. So there are no territories anymore. There's only really 2 places to work. And the independent scene's kind of populated and actually overpopulated, right? Because there's so many people out there and only 2 places to work at the time. That we were all splitting the same crowds. So I remember when I first got in, the magic number was 100. If you could draw 100 people, you were the king of the mountain. And I remember guys going crazy over 100 people. And now I think now the independent scene 100% is way healthier.
So TAP is somebody that, good friend of the show. We frequent the shows down there multiple times a month. You spend a lot of time there. What's one of your favorite things about working for some of these small promotions like TAP?
The thing I love specifically about Tennessee All-Pro, and I've known the owners of Tennessee All-Pro Wrestling for, gosh, I'm trying to remember when they started. I think they started in 2012. And I remember I've known them since they took over, and before that, and the previous company, Fusion Tradition Wrestling, that they purchased. So I mean, I've known those guys forever. But the thing I specifically love about TAP is that they are putting a lot. Like every time I go down there, about once a month, the entire setup's changing. They're constantly upgrading. They're constantly trying to make their arena better. They're trying to make the roster better, the wrestlers better. I mean, I do not see many places around here that put that much effort into their event. And not only that, I enjoy myself down there. I really love coming down there. That's the fans I've wrestled in front of for many years. So being able to go back and wrestle in front of them, after a probably 5-year or more break is always pretty cool. And I mean, I like being close to home too. I'm not even going to lie about that.
I've frequented Murfreesboro a lot. Like I said in my intro, I graduated from MTSU's mass comm department when I got my journalism degree. So I was down in Murfreesboro a ton. I'm also a big fan of TAP, man. The fans down there are amazing. They have their own kind of culture when it comes to how they run things. If you've ever been to a real powerful, energetic indie show, even with 50 to 100 people in the crowd, it still feels like it could be 1,000 sometimes in that the arena when we're down there at TAP. I love the energy that the crowd brings specifically for that brand of wrestling.
Yeah, they're extremely passionate, and they like their kind of wrestling. Which the first couple times I was there, I had to be reminded that they're real specific to what they like. But I was commenting in one of the tag matches I had recently with LBK that I was like, man, these people are insanely loud.
They are for such a small. The building itself is nice and big and spacious, but when you even get a small amount of people in there, the unified chants they have and the way they do it, like it's bar none. And I've been to a lot of indie promotions around the area right now, so even a 50-person TAP crowd is just as loud as a 200-person crowd anywhere else, and I love that about it.
Yeah, and that's not to negate the fact that the tap crowds have been growing. We've been there with it packed out and stuff like that. It just kind of depends on the week, and it's hard with a weekly show. A weekly show is really hard to do anymore.
No, the only reason I bring that up because you mentioned that sweet number around 100, and I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I've been to TAP and there's been less than 100 people there. They always draw a crowd every week.
Right. Oh yeah, and I've wrestled in front of. I remember starting out wrestling in front of 30 people regularly.
Um,
My lowest until 2016 was 12, and then in 2016, 2015, I got booked for a guy with two paid fans, and the show still happened.
so, how do you prepare mentally when you look at the crowd like that and you know, okay, there's two paid fans in the crowd? How do you prepare mentally to go into a crowd like that versus a crowd with hundreds of people, say at like an NWA show or somewhere like that?
I know specifically because the one with two paid people was about a 4.5 hour drive away as well. My two immediate thoughts were, I don't think I'm going to get paid, which I did. I'll keep that. Let me throw that out there. The promoter did pay me. Um, and I should have stayed in college. But I think in every entertainment profession, you do that. I'm sure there's bands who play a really crappy gig one night and they're like, is this really what I want to do? There's comedians who go up there and just bomb in front of like four people and they go, is this for me? And then, you get home and you brush it off, hopefully, and then you go on to the next one.
I'm a chef in the real world, so I definitely get that feeling where you can feed 500 people and make all 500 happy, but the one that said you cooked a terrible meal is going to be the one ringing in your ear the rest of the night. So
100%. Don't read the comments.
yeah, for sure. Especially now in the age of the 21st century and the internet, they can rip you to shreds if you let them.
I've always talked about when, especially for comments and stuff like that, I've never, and this is bad because you're supposed to use Yelp for this, but I've never had a really great time and thought, I really need to put this on Yelp.
For sure. That was my biggest enemy for a huge chunk of my career. I spent 17 years in the industry, and Yelp became an arch nemesis of mine.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You never have a really great meal, and then before you head home, go, I'm going to put this on Yelp. You go, that was great. Now on to the next.
All right, let's dive back into wrestling just a touch.
Yeah.
You spent some time recently with Billy Corgan and the guys over at NWA. What was it like to have a chance to work with the cornerstone of the wrestling territories for as long as they were, and then they come back rebranded under Billy Corgan's reign?
Yeah, so I did work with the NWA under the prior ownership, the Bruce Tharp era, I believe is what they call it, and I did some really fun things during that time. I held the Southern Heavyweight Championship. Probably one of the highlights. There's two highlights that come from that time was my Southern Tag Team Championship run with my good friend Drew Haskins as the Untouchables. I think at one point we were one of the hottest tag teams in the Tennessee area. And then I actually got to wrestle for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Satoshi Kojima from All Japan and New Japan Pro Wrestling. New Japan at the time, which is, as a pro wrestling fan that I am, like this, it almost was more important than the belt to me, just because in my studying, I loved All Japan and I loved New Japan. And in my study, I've watched countless Kojima matches. So the fact that he was coming to, at the time, Millersville, Tennessee, to wrestle for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, and I was the one wrestling him, what was really cool. When the when the changeover happened, um, it was kind of, I was a big fan of the new product, but I had no inlays or anything like that. And then I believe it was the end of 2019. It's December of 2019. I went down and worked out in a backstage role, I guess. There, I just kind of helping out, producing, and then COVID happened. And well, actually, while I was down there in December, I had a hurt neck. That's not why I wasn't wrestling. I wasn't even offered a wrestling role. I was just offered to come down and help. But was good. I mean, I would have wrestled, but I had a hurt neck at the time, so I probably shouldn't have. Well, then COVID happened, and I was about to quit the wrestling business because I had come back, had one match, and then COVID happened, and I'm like, wrestling's just not going to happen for me anymore. I would still go down occasionally to work out with my buddy Kerry Awful from the Carnies, if you're familiar with that tag team. And one day, I got a text message from a New Jersey area code, or excuse me, a call first, and I ignored it because I don't know anybody in New Jersey. But then luckily I got a text message from the same number that, hi, this is Pat Kenny, who is the executive producer of the National Wrestling Alliance, and he would like to use me for some work. And I immediately stopped what I was doing, ran outside, and called Pat back and got everything set up. And the phone call was in February of 21. And I did my first taping with the NWA in March of 2021. And knock on wood, I've been with them since.
Man, that's awesome. You also spent some time with OVW. You want to speak on your time with that promotion as well?
Okay, so funny enough, yeah, so I mentioned Pat Kenny. TNA at the time was doing, this is into 2011, I believe. TNA at the time was doing gut checks on their house shows. Basically, you go, you do a tryout in front of the agent, stuff like that. And I did a gut check in Gainesville, Georgia, I believe in December of 2011, if my dates are right. And the person leading my gut check was Pat Kenny. So that was the first time I got to meet Pat that he remembers. And I can get to that in a minute. That's a funny story. But he, so it went well. Not well enough for like, hey kid, here's a contract. But it went well. They liked me. And Pat said, I'm going to send your information to Al. Al Snow was working as a producer at the time with TNA and running OVW. And after that, I spent to think about either just over or just under a year with OVW, going up every Wednesday night and doing their TVs and working with a lot of really talented people because they had their developmental with TNA at the time. So I was working with a lot of the TNA guys who were coming through and just learning a tremendous amount, specifically about working TV, because I hadn't done a lot of that up to that point.
What is the biggest difference, do you think, working TV versus working just a spot show or a house show? Because I know a lot of guys talk about the magnitude of your timing and everything just has to be pinpoint and precise when you're on TV versus at a house show. You kind of get some leeway with timing. What's some of the biggest differences for doing TV versus doing just a house show?
So you brought up time. Time is extremely important. On an independent show or a house show, they'll tell you, hey, you got 15 to 20. On TV, it's like, hey, you've got 7, go 6:30. And you have to try to hit that point as close as possible, because on a TV product, any time you're over takes away from something else, whether it be advertisement or another match. Either one is money, right? If you take commercial time out, that's money taken away, etc. So that's a big important thing. Working the cameras as well, because when you're working a house show, you're working all 4 sides. So obviously you got to know where your cameras are at all times. That being said, there's a way to work both as far as the crowd and the camera, because I hate, and I know that it's kind of the thing sometimes, but I hate people who just forget the crowd's even there. I understand your bigger audience is through the camera and that is your priority, but don't forget about the people in the building, because if they're quiet, it makes what you do seem even more boring. That said, that's an opinion that you didn't ask for, but no, knowing where the cameras are and definitely hitting your times.
How important you're giving me ammunition here, man? I love it. How important do you feel like the crowd is, whether you're live for an indie show or for a TV taping? You started to touch on it, so I was already on my notes, anyways. How important is the crowd in telling the story you're trying to tell when you're in the ring, to you as a
I
wrestler?
think crowd's extremely important. For a house show, that's your 100% number one priority. You have no other master at that point besides whoever's telling you what to do, but you have no other master. As far as TV, I think they're extremely important in the fact that yes, you're playing to the larger crowd at home, but like I said, if the energy isn't there in the arena, and I think we found that during the COVID era, those matches sometimes were really good but really hard to get into because there's no energy for the wrestlers and for the people watching at home. For the wrestlers, everything hurts more when there's no adrenaline, and that crowd gives you adrenaline. But as far as the people watching at home, you can just feel the energy come through it. When I watch WrestleMania and I see one of the extreme giant WrestleMania, when Steve Austin walked out, him walking out didn't give me goosebumps, but the crowd's reaction to him walking out gave me goosebumps. So I mean, I think they're massively important for a TV product as well.
So keeping it alongside that side with ring psychology, how well do you feel like connecting with the worker you're working with, connecting with the ref and the crowd all together to build that story? How do you adapt from person to person to make that equation all fall together?
I've always found to try to play to my opponent's strengths, and if they have a weakness, we'll just avoid that. Now, I mean, some people you're just not going to have chemistry with. It just happens. There's some people that I wrestle with that are really good, and we just for some reason don't click. And that might bother me more than anything. If a guy's in there and he's terrible, and we have a bad match, I'm just like, he's bad. You know what I mean? But if he's really good, and I know he's really good, and we just don't click, man, that'll keep me up at night. I'm like, what am I doing? Um, but no, if a guy's not a really good runner, like he's a big guy and he doesn't need to be running around, you're going to have a different style match than if a guy's a little guy that's going to flip all over me. Cool, I get to sit there and catch him, but I'm not going to have him body slam me. So it's just finding out, hey, what do you do well? Okay, we're going to work around that. What do you do not well? Okay, guess what? We don't have to even worry about that. And if you're good and you can be great at one thing and terrible at other things, but if you're good enough at all of the things, and I think that's where people say fundamentals, 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 because everyone should be at least capable of the fundamentals. So even if you guys don't match on things you're good at, you can go back to fundamentals and have a match and it be good. And then you just work on your story from there. Story's way more important than moves anyway.
So speaking of fundamentals, where did wrestling begin for you training wise?
um, so I started training, and I laugh because of the story how I got there. I started training with Mike Woods, Buzzed Up, and Lee Condry. They were working for. It goes back to NWA as it feels like everything does lately. NWA main event at the time. That's where I first saw them and met them. They were running in Columbia, Tennessee, and Murfreesboro, Tennessee, at the old Inferno bar, as it was at the time. They do their TV tapings. But how I got there was because I didn't know you could, internet was kind of new-ish in '05. We weren't all sucked in like we are now. So I didn't know, hey, I could just search for where's a wrestling school. Because if I could, I would have went to OVW. But I would just go to independent shows. I'd dress nice, like better than most of the people at the independent shows. And then as the people, I'd make sure I got front row. And as the people walked by, I would literally ask them on their way to their match, hey, do you train wrestlers? And I failed a lot. And then one night, Mike Woods goes, wait after the show. And we waited like an hour after the show. And they saw that we were serious and we talked about it. And Lee Condry lived in Murfreesboro. And yeah, he had a ring. And so we'd go to his place, we'd set it up. We trained 2 to 3 days a week. And then I became good buddies with Lee. So on off days, if I came and set up the ring, I could train it until as long as I wanted. So I would leave college if I didn't have to work, go straight over there, set up the ring by myself, train until the street lights came on, and Lee would always be nice and help me tear it down.
I feel like I've heard a lot of guys talk about setting up and tearing down the ring as part of like cutting their teeth in the industry. And it's almost like a coming of age to have to do that in some ways. I feel like for some of you guys coming up on the independent circuit, like having to do ring detail and small things like that to cut your teeth is part of what you have to do to make it, right?
Yeah, well, so I think everyone should know at least the basics of putting up and tearing down a ring because A, it's the platform that you're working on. But B, it'll get you an opportunity though. The reason I was working backstage at the NWA was because I knew the ring. The ring that they were using, it was a Crimson, shout out, who runs Tried and True Pro, former Impact Wrestling superstar, works with the NWA. I've known him for years, and he runs his own promotion. And when it first started, I was the head of his ring crew because we just didn't have a crew. You know what I mean? It was a startup company, right? So it was me and a couple guys who volunteered, and I knew how to set up a ring. I didn't know that ring specifically, but I got to know it really well. So when we went down there, he goes, "Hey, would you like to come and help the ring? I know you know the ring well, you know." And so I went and helped down with that. If I didn't know how to set up and tear down a ring, they probably wouldn't have, he was probably throwing me a bone, but he also, if I was going to be useless, I wouldn't have been down there.
What was the training regiment like when you first started?
Uh, it, it was real. So neither Mikey, Buzzy, Lee may have, but Mikey and Buzzy for sure hadn't trained anybody before. So it was kind of, it was real, what's the word? Fundamental based, which is good. But they didn't have you didn't see them pulling out a notebook of all right, here's how I train people. They were kind of learning on the fly as we were, as we went. But it was real loose. I got a lot of it. Uh, let me phrase that. I went further and learned new stuff when I would train on my own. Not saying they would do good stuff, but then when I had that free ring time, that's when I experiment on stuff that probably shouldn't have gone to yet. You know what I mean? I'm learning hip tosses, and then when I have it on my own, I've got a mat out there jumping off the top rope, dropping elbows. You know what I mean? But that's where I learned the more advanced stuff. But no, I got drilled with fundamentals.
Did the ropes tear you up when you first started running the ropes? I hear a lot that the people are getting tore up when they first start running the ropes.
A little. So saying that, I was also a backyard wrestler, and I was a backyard wrestler that had a ring. We built a ring, and while the ropes weren't the same, because in most rings in the South, they're steel cables, wrapped in some kind of hose piping, then taped up. Ours were mountain climbing rope that we tightened as tight as we could humanly tighten. So I've hit them when they were rock solid, which didn't last long because it's rope, it's elastic, it stretches. Um, but I knew how to hit them. Did I have bruises? Yes, but I've heard stories of some people training and peeing blood. I didn't get that bad. I did not get that bad. But yeah, was I bruised up? Absolutely.
Excellent. All right, man. Well, I end all of my interviews I do with 5 rapid fire questions. I've got yours queued up and ready to go. You ready?
Sure.
What's your favorite city you've ever wrestled in?
Oh, geez. Gosh, favorite city I've ever. Man, I think just because of what it was, St. Louis, Missouri. We did the Crockett Cup in the Chase Ballroom where wrestling was held in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So the nostalgia of that venue, but the crowd there was so hyped for it. It was electric. And our match, the first match we wrestled there because we did tapings there as well. The match we did was following a Ric Flair promo. So they were electric from that promo. They had no idea who I was, and they still cheered for me. So I mean, it was awesome, man. It was a great experience.
Wrestling at the Chase is legendary, man. That's almost as big as Madison Square Gardens in a lot of markets, depending on who you look at and who you ask about it. Like, that's a huge milestone in anybody's career to have a chance to wrestle at the Chase. So that's awesome. What's your favorite finisher of all time?
Man, for years I've done the pile driver, and that's been kind of my thing. I've kind of backed off of it because of current use of somebody else in the NWA. But I like old school things, man. I like things that were tried and true. So when I had to go away from the pile driver, now I just DDT folks. You know what? It worked for Jake.
That's another great one. I've always said that the pile driver is one of my favorite finishers of all time. It was so protected for forever. It seemed like nobody kicked out of one, and then it became I don't want to say overused, but then it became almost underused too. I've seen a lot of roller coaster rides with that move specifically, but it's always been one of my favorites.
Well, yeah, because they talk about the high injury rate, but at the same time, I've used it for 16 years now, and I've never hurt anybody.
What's your favorite fast food restaurant?
Oh gosh, that changes a lot. So for a long time, it was Taco Bell. And Taco Bell has done so much to their menu that it's just not the same anymore. Right now, currently, and I don't go much. I used to be 320 pounds and I went along a lot, but I don't go as much. And I always forget about this one, but every time I have it, I'm like, this is the best. Why do I not go here's more? It's Checkers or Rallies, depending on where you're at. Man, their fries are the best. They are the best fast food fries. And you want to go there when you just want really greasy fast food because you're going to get it. But their burgers are good, but really they're spicy. It's a spicy double chicken sandwich. I forgot what it's called. Is awesome. And their deep sea double, which is a double fish fillet sandwich. Well, chef's kiss. So good.
That's awesome. I 1000%, if I go somewhere and they have a spicy chicken sandwich, I'm going to eat it. I'm from
Yep.
Nashville, so hot chicken is in my blood. So if somebody says they have a spicy chicken sandwich, I almost feel obligated as a Nashvilleian to eat it. I've lost count. I think that was 3 or 4. So I'm going to ask one more. If you had to pick a season to go on vacation in, what season would you go on vacation?
Here recently, we've been going on vacation a lot in around October, so it's not too cold, but it's not too awful hot. We do a lot of cruises though, so I mean, it really doesn't matter as far as weather wise. But October is really good because things are off season, and the weather is usually not too crazy. So that's when we tend to go.
Excellent. All right. Plug your stuff for me, Jeremiah. Tell everybody where they can find you and what you're up to.
Sure, yeah, you can find. So first off, as we talked about, I'm with National Wrestling Alliance. You can find me on NWA Power and NWA USA. That is available on Fight TV, or you can check us out on YouTube. You can find me on social media. All my social media is at Plunkitis. I'm sure there will be a spelling of that because that's a really weird name. You can thank Danny Deals from the NWA for that name. He called me that one time 10 years ago, and that became my Twitter handle. And then as far as t-shirts, I'm on Pro Wrestling Tees, but most of my new designs go up over at storefrontier.com/Plunky's Gimmick Table. And then, yeah, I have a Google Calendar that has all my wrestling dates. I actually just updated it today after way too long. But I'll be putting that out there, and come see me at a live event.
Excellent, Jeremiah. Well, I appreciate you stopping by and chatting about some wrestling with me.
I appreciate you having me, man. Anytime. I'd love to do this again.